Winter 1943. Recklinghausen, Germany, inside a drafty hangar that smelled of oil and arrogance. For Luftwaffe engineers, gathered around a table, cluttered with blueprints. A fresh intelligence folder had just arrived. On the cover, USA outside. The wind howled, but inside, confidence burned like a furnace. To these men, an engine wasn't just a machine. It was a religion. Perfection wasn't mass-produced. It was crafted. Every single Daimler-Benz engine carried the fingerprint of a human hand. Bolts filed by feel. Tolerances judged by ear. American machines, by comparison, were considered crude, sloppy, and built in tons, not tolerances. Mullah, the senior engineer, flipped a page and laughed. The United States intends to manufacture 50,000 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. He snorted. They can't even train enough mechanics to maintain them, and they think they'll build 50,000. Carl, his assistant, flicked ash from his cigarette. Mass production kills precision, he said. It was a mantra on every German shop floor. To them, each British Merlin was alive, a unique masterpiece tuned by craftsmen like violin makers. The idea that Detroit, home of noisy cars and leaky engines, could reproduce that spirit was utterly absurd. Muller tapped his pencil on the report. This is what happens when accountants design engines. The room erupted in laughter. But then, they noticed something unsettling buried deep in the file. The Americans hadn't just copied the drawings. They had redrawn everything from scratch. Every single measurement was converted into American standards. To the German mind, this was heresy. Carl shook his head. Convert millimeters 2 inches. They will destroy the engine. Mueller scribbled a note in the margin. Copy equals inferior by design. Outside, a Daimler-Benz engine roared across the frozen airfield. Mueller smiled proudly. That is how an engine should sound. Hand-built. Alive. Perfect. He snapped the folder shut. If they ever face us with these Packard toys, we'll burn them out of the sky. What Mueller couldn't possibly imagine was that across the Atlantic, those toys were already running flawlessly, built by machines that never tired, never bragged, and never made mistakes. In Germany, perfection was an art form. In America, perfection was arithmetic. Let's rewind. Derby, England, 1940. Inside the red brick walls of the Rolls-Royce plant, the war thundered in rhythm with hammers and micrometers. The Merlin Engine 12, cylinders of British defiance, was being born. Harold Watkins, a veteran machinist, hovered over a half-finished crankcase. His hands calloused, but his eyes razor-sharp. Each movement of his file was deliberate, intimate, almost musical. When the gauge finally read 5/1000ths of an inch, he smiled. Perfect. The Merlin wasn't designed for mass production. It was built for immortality. It was 1,500 horsepower of mechanical poetry, requiring over 3,000 hours of labor per engine. Each one was slightly unique, like a handcrafted violin. When the first Spitfire climbed skyward, the Merlin's voice became the anthem of survival. Pilots swore they could feel the engine breathe with them in the cockpit. But brilliance has its limits. Engines failed. Mechanics wept over scorched metal. Nations don't win wars, one violin at a time. American observers watched in awe. One finally asked a foreman, "How do you expect to win a war building engines like violins?" The foreman answered softly, "Because ours play the right tune." But Britain needed more than just a perfect tune. It needed overwhelming volume. And so, reluctantly, painfully, the blueprints were handed to America. Rolls-Royce workers were furious. One shouted, "The Americans will drown it in oil and call it progress." But the sky could not wait for pride. Detroit, Michigan, 1942. Over the Detroit River, the night sky glowed orange not from bombs, but from the relentless furnaces of industry. Inside Packard's vast brick factory, the thunder of production never ceased. When the Derby blueprints arrived, they were a mountain of hand-drawn sketches, cryptic notes, inconsistent symbols, and imperial dimensions filled with artisan guesswork. Packard's chief engineer, Jesse Vincent, sighed. "If we build it the British way," he said, We'll make one engine a month. He looked up at his team. We need one an hour. So Packard did the unthinkable. They didn't just copy the Merlin. They re-engineered it from the ground up. 21,000 drawings were meticulously read. All measurements were converted to U.S. standards. Every single part was standardized, stripping away the quirks of hand-fitting. Human intuition was systematically removed from the process. Where Rolls-Royce drawings might have said fit snug, Packard wrote, clearance 0.0012 inches, plus or minus 0.0001. Machines replaced instincts. Precision gauges replaced fingertips. Arithmetic replaced ritual. Then, in December 1942, the first Packard-built Merlin ran. It didn't roar like its British cousin. It purred. It was smoother. More durable. And, most shockingly of all, perfectly consistent from one engine to the next. Detroit had accomplished the impossible. Mass-produced perfection. Wittenmann's Packard was building one brand-new Merlin every 60 minutes. When the engines arrived in England, Rolls-Royce engineers were stunned. The American parts didn't just fit their British engines perfectly, they often performed better. The copy had become the improvement, and then the sky changed hands forever. In a quiet California hangar in 1943, engineers mounted a new Packard Merlin into a new American fighter, the P-51 Mustang. When test pilot Bob Chilton pulled back on the stick, the Mustang didn't just climb. It shot skyward like a bolt of lightning. He laughed over the radio. Gentlemen, I think we just changed the war. He was absolutely right. With its Packard-built Merlin hut, the P-51 Mustang could reach 437 miles per hour, climb higher and faster than anything Germany had, and, most importantly, escort Allied bombers all the way to Berlin and back home. For the Luftwaffe, it was a nightmare made real. One German pilot later recalled, they came out of the sun. I thought they were Spitfires, but they just kept climbing. Then their tracers fell like lightning. Back in Germany, when engineers examined the engine plate from a downed P-51, it read, Packard Motor Division, Detroit, USA. One of them ran his hand across the smooth casting and whispered, they improved it, damn them. They improved it. By late 1943, Packard Merlins were powering Spitfires, Mosquitoes, Lancasters, and Mustangs across Europe. The numbers were devastating. Mission range for fighters increased by 60%. Engine failures were cut in half. Operational readiness skyrocketed. The Luftwaffe lost air superiority. In a German intelligence report, General Erhard Milch underlined one chilling line. Enemy industrial capacity is now beyond measurable limits. He whispered to himself, they have turned engineering into warfare. Detroit never slept. Sparks flew through the night as women on assembly lines wore badges that proudly read Merlin Division. Every 60 minutes, a new engine was born. The German engineers who had mocked mass production had been proven profoundly wrong. Perfection hadn't died on the assembly line. It had evolved. In Britain, craftsmanship created brilliance. In America, standardization made that brilliance unstoppable. The Packard Merlin was no longer a copy. It was the future proof that machines could sing, that industry could create art, and that sometimes arithmetic wins the war. Thanks for watching.